Mud's Misfit. This is day 11 for Raid Shadows Legends free-to-play series. As you can see, we got a little bit of gear for our day 11 login reward. Getting some gems out of our gem mine. Oh, some more mystery shards. The Fusion pre-warm-up event is starting to come to an end, so make sure you're getting your points for that, because it's real nice to get those 2 extra ancient shards, especially on a free-to-play. I've got mine. Just gotta collect them. So we're up to 18 agents for the next 2x, so that'll be kind of nice. The Fusion event is started. So if you're thinking you're going to be able to do that, it's time to get started on that. Right now we have right now is Ice Golem tournaments going on, and I do believe a Dungeon Divers. Yes, Dungeon Divers is going along with that to give you an itinerant and a casticators from the Ice Golem. So, you know, use your resources wisely. That's, like I said, just depends on where you're at. I'm nowhere near. I probably get a few of the rares. Might be able to get a couple of the epics, but there's nothing I'm too excited about currently. So, not going to be going too hard on that. We do have a 10x starting tomorrow, and it's got some real nice champions. Just remember though, the chance to increase a legendary or an epic doesn't increase. You just got a better chance of pulling the champions that are in the 10x. So, you know, it's still going to stay 6% to get a legendary on the sacred, 0.5% on void and ancient to get a legendary, 94% for the epic, which of course 94 and 6, but 8% chance to get an epic off of ancient and voids. So if you're not going for the fusion, I'd hold on to your shards until next weekend, but that's up to you. That's just me. I don't pretty much, unless I'm doing the fusion, I'm not going to pull on a 10x. But the only time you do that is if you want a specific champion, and that's more towards endgame. There are some really good champions, and there's some of the epics I'd really love to have on this account, but chances of that happening are pretty nil. First one we got, Ultimate Gaelic. His A1 is attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing an HP burn, debuff on the target for 2 turns if this champion is under an increased attack buff. So you gotta remember, you gotta have that increased attack buff on him for him to place that HP burn. Fills this champion's turn meter by 10% if this attack is critical. Fills this champion's turn meter by 5% if this attack is not critical. His A2 attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing an HP burn debuff on the target for 2 turns if this champion is under an increased attack. Once again, you got to have an increased attack. Decreases the target's turn meter by 25% and places a 50% increased attack buff on this champion for 2 turns if this attack is critical. It decreases the target's turn meter by 10% if this attack is not critical. It's on a 4-turn cooldown, books down to 3. His A3 attacks all enemies 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 2 turns if this champion is under an increased attack buff. Each hit also has a 75% chance of decreasing the turn meter by 20% if the target is under an HP debuff. So you pretty much want to run him with an increased attack champion. It's on a 6-turn cooldown, and it books down to 4. He's decent for faction wars, and if you got nothing better for an HP burn champion, he's good in Spider as long as you got someone to throw up that increase in attack for him. He's an older champion, but he's decent. Next we got Mordecai, and he's what, Sacred Order? He's a newer champion. He was one of the epics you had to have at one point for a fusion. He was. I really like him. I use him on my main for Spider. His A1 attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 10%, has a 60% instead of the target is under HP burn debuff. His A2 has a 75% chance of decreasing the turn meter of all enemies by 15% and fills the turn meter of all allies by 15%. So he's a nice little turn meter depleter and booster for your team. It's on a 4-turn cooldown, and it books down to 3, and it'll book up to 100% chance. So that's a nice little skill too. And then his A3 has a 75% chance, books up to 100, of placing an HP burn on all enemies for 2 turns. Places a 50% increased attack buff on all allies for 3 turns. It's on a 5-turn cooldown, books down to 4. And he's got pretty good base stats. He's a real good epic. He's definitely one that if you want to get built at some point. He's great for Spider. And the next one he partners with is great for Spider. He's great crowd control for dungeons. I mean, you can't go wrong with him. He's another one I'd love to have on this account. He's out of the demon spawn. His A1 attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of decreasing the duration of one random buff and the target is under HP burn debuff. Also has a 30% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 15% if they under a freeze debuff. And those will book up another 20%. He does take quite a few books. His A2 places a block debuffs on all allies for 1 turn and a 25% strengthen buff on all allies for 2 turns. It's on a 5-turn cooldown and it books down to 1. Or books down 1. It'll be a 4-turn cooldown when it's done. Strengthen is a great skill. Not many champions have it. We're starting to get a few more. Like I said, he's a great champion. His A3 attacks all enemies, has a 70% chance of placing a freeze debuff for 1 turn on enemies whose attack is higher than their defense, and has a 70% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 1 turn on enemies whose defense is equal to or higher than their attack. That books up to, those both book up to a 90%. It's a 5-turn cooldown, books down to 3. Like I said, another 6 books. Like I said, he likes to read, but he's definitely a good champion. And his passive heals all allies by 5% of their max HP every time an enemy under an HP burn debuff gets a turn. So you got him with someone like a Mordecai or something that's got HP burn on everybody. Every time they take a turn, everybody's getting a 5% heal. So that works out real nice if they're under HP burn. And it fills the turn meters of all allies by 10% every time an enemy under a freeze debuff gets a turn. So that's, one way or the other, you're getting a little bit of a boost from his passive. He's a real nice champion. Our next one is from the Barbarians. He's another great one. Another one I'd like to have on this account. The Fat Man, Farrakhan the Fat. He's an allied attack champion. On his A1, attacks one enemy, has a 40% chance of placing 60% decreased defense for 2 turns, books to 50%. Nice little extra boss buff for decreased defense if you need it. On his A2, attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing an HP burn debuff and 2 5% poison debuffs for 2 turns. Books up to 100%. Goes from a 4 turn to a 3 turn once booked. Like I said, nice little extra bonus. HP burn and poison both come in real handy. And his A3, another nice one, places a 30% increased crit rate and a 30% increased crit damage on all allies except this champion for 3 turns. Then all allies except this champion will attack one target enemy. It's on a 6 turn, books down to a 4. So, like I said, first he buffs everybody, then they all attack the target that he wants to attack. So, you can't beat that. Next, out of the Oregon tribes, we got Ignatius. He's one of the harder hitting defense champions. He's another one that you can use for. He's another one you can use for Spider. You just gotta dumb down his gear a little bit so he's not doing too much damage, because he does hit pretty good. But on his A1, attacks one enemy, has a 15% chance of placing stun debuff for 1 turn, books to 25%. His A2 attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn, books to 75%. It's on a 5 turn cooldown, books down to 4. So provoke can come in real handy too. And then on his A3, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing HP burn, books to 100, debuff for 2 turns. This debuff cannot be resisted, so you don't even need to have accuracy for that, I do believe. It's on a 6 turn cooldown, books down to 5. So 1200 defense. It's not bad. Like I said, he does got good multipliers, and he's a pretty good champion. Next one is in the Undead. Crypt King Grawl. He recently received a buff, and now he's really good once again for Spider. He's another HP burn champion. Seen a pattern? But on his A1, has a 60% chance, or attacks one enemy, has a 60% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack buff for 2 turns. Has a 100% chance instead of the target is under HP burn debuff or a freeze debuff. So, nice little A1. His A2 attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing HP burn, books to 100, debuff for 2 turns, 4 turn cooldown, books down to 3. So, like I said, that's a real nice skill right there. HP burn is one of the best skills for Spider. Once you get past around level 20 or up and higher. On his A3, attacks all enemies, places a freeze debuff on each target for 1 turn if they are under HP burn. Also extends the duration of any HP burn debuff to 3 turns. This extension cannot be resisted on a 4 turn cooldown. So, yeah, like I said, he's got to where he's actually one of the a lot of people's favorites now for the Spider. And a lot of people like to use HP burn champions in Doom Tower too. It takes a little bit longer, but it's very effective. Next one we got is in the Shadowkin. One of the newer legendaries added to the game. Kyoku. Butchered his name, I'm sure. Or her name. It is a her. Another defensive champion. On her A1, attacks one enemy, will place 3 hits if this target is under 3 or more debuffs. Each hit has a 40% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns. That will book up to 50%. A2 attacks all enemies, has an 80% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. Books up to 70. After attacking, has an 80% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 2 turns on all enemies that this skill did not place a decrease attack debuff on. That books up to 100. The A3 places a 50% ally protection buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. Also places a block damage buff on this champion for 3 turns. Then grants an extra turn. 5-turn cooldown, books down to 4. Ally protection comes in real nice for Clan Boss. Got a passive. Every time this champion is hit with a critical hit, heals all allies by the 15% of their max HP. Then places a 60% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns. It's on a 6-turn cooldown, books down to 4. And for the Void Legendary, we need to go to Skinwalkers. And it's Timisia, the Fox, another great spider champion. A lot of people are real high on her for spider. Fairly new to the game too. A1 attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Has a 100% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns on the target before attacking if the target is under an HP burn. Excuse me. A2 attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing an HP burn debuff for 3 turns. Books up to 100. Has a 75% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn on targets with 50% turn meter or more. Once again, that goes up to 100. Has a 75% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 3 turns on targets with less than 50% turn meter. Once again, that books up to 100. It's on a 4-turn cooldown, books down to 3. The A3 attacks one enemy. Damage increases by 40% for each active HP burn debuff in the battle, up to 400%. Oh, wow. Also has a 75% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 15%, decreases the target's turn meter by an additional 15% for each active HP burn, and when you book it, it adds another 25% to those, so that's nice. On a 4-turn cooldown, books down to 3. Got a nice passive. Whenever an ally receives freeze debuff, has a 50% chance of replacing it with an HP burn for 2 turns instead. This debuff cannot be blocked or removed. Whenever an enemy is under HP burn debuff, this champion is immune to stun, sleep, freeze, fear, true fear, provoke, petrification debuffs. And that pretty much rounds up what we got for the 10X. Like I said, we got some pretty nice champions on the 10X, so they're definitely trying to get everyone to pull some shards. Free to play account. Like I said yesterday, we got Kale 6-starred. Got him just about leveled up. He's up to level 59. We went through and got a hard all 3-starred. Everything's all good to go there. So we get our ancient. We'll take that. And then we got We got a good majority of brutal. All 3-starred. We just got 3 instances left. But we were just going through level and kills. Ran out of energy, so we had to stop. But so that's coming along nicely. Clan boss. We pretty much did the same thing. We got our big chest on normal and easy. Like I said, it's just kind of plugging away at it. There's just a lot going on. There always is when there's a start of a fusion. Like I said, I think we're gonna call that. That's getting so it doesn't get too much longer. We're still just farming food. I appreciate you tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please post them down below. And if you like what you're seeing, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. We appreciate you. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Be strong.